In this video, we will be going over the retopology tools inside of Modo. We won't be creating anything with intricate or specific topology. We're just going to be familiarizing ourselves with the retopology tools. From the previous lecture that defined topology and retopology, we learned that you first should have a reference mesh as a starting point. Ideally, you would be recreating this specific mesh. There were numerous reasons why you would need to or want to remodel something, which was covered in detail in the aforementioned lecture. To keep things simple, for this demonstration we will just be working with a sphere as our reference mesh, or you could think of it as our high poly mesh. We will be inserting a quad ball sphere with a subdivision level of 5, so let's do that real quick. Click on sphere. We don't want to click in our 3D viewport because we want to change some settings over here. It's currently set to a globe. We'll want to change this to a quad ball. This subdivision level right here is set to 0. We're going to go ahead and set that to 5. And right here the polygon type is set to face, so this should be good. So we can either hit the apply button or right click in the 3D viewport, again being mindful that all these settings are default, so hit apply and we get this sphere in our 3D viewport. I'll just hit the space bar to drop that sphere creation tool. So we chose a quad ball with a subdivision level of 5 because it gave us this nice little symmetry line down the middle, and it was dense enough that we'll be able to kind of work with it. So after your sphere is inserted, what I want you to do is go up to Geometry, go to Polygon, and choose Subdivide. So from here, we want to set our subdivision method to smooth, fractal to 0%. This max smoothing angle doesn't really matter at this point. You can just leave to the default or have it at 89.5. Hit OK, and you can see that makes our sphere more high poly. So let's do that one more time. Now we have a very high poly sphere. So at this point, we'll go ahead and just save our scene. Just name it Retoposphere. And for now, I'll just throw that on the desktop and just save this as a Modo scene. Hit save, and then we're good to go. And one more thing actually that might be beneficial would be inactive mesh right here, setting your wireframe to 0%. And this would only be for this viewport. By default, it might be set to something like 20. Realistically, I don't need to see the wireframe on this mesh at this time, so I'm just going to set that to 0. And I would recommend that you do the same. And then just for review, the inactive mesh, the one that we just changed the wireframe to, is going to be the mesh item over here that's not selected. So right now, the one right here called Retopo, that's the one that's selected. So this is the inactive mesh. So now if I select this one, it's going to be the active mesh, and you're going to see the wireframe is going to be a little bit of a different color. So one additional thing that we're going to do, just to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to add one more mesh, go over to our modeling tools over here. I'm going to hold the Control key and just tap on the cone. So now let's go ahead, and this cone, it's going to probably have this different colored wireframe. So I'm just going to double click this cone, scale it down, and I actually want to move it forward on the z-axis. So to just make sure that I'm doing that correctly, I'm going to go to the top view, so hold Control and Spacebar, go to top, let go of Control and Spacebar, or what you can do over here is go from perspective to top, switch to the Move tool with this button right here, hit W, and just slide this guy down. So again, this is just to kind of make sure that I stay oriented. So this is our sphere. This little cone is facing upwards and it's in front of the sphere. It's just kind of so we don't get lost in 3D space. So UI-wise, I went over here and I clicked on this little guy right here. This is the kind of Create tab. So prior to this, I was actually on this guy right here, which is, think of it as the Topology tab. So if you're ever not sure which one of these does what you need it to do and you need to get back to the topology tools, if I just go to the modeling tab, it'll kind of reset and go back to the modeling tab here. And I go back to the topology tab and it'll kind of reset all my tools for me, just in case you accidentally click and you're a little bit lost as far as what tools you need. So the first tool that we're going to kind of focus on is this top guy right here called the Topology Pen. So the first thing I actually want to do is let's actually just rename this to cone. We want to select our retopo mesh. So right now it's an empty mesh. We don't have any polygons in the scene, so we really can't edit any geometry. So we need to create a little bit of geometry. So what I'm going to do is just left click to select the Topology Pen Tool. You'll see a bunch of settings down here. We can kind of ignore those for right now. So what I want you to do is hold the Control key and left click and drag on your surface. And you'll see a polygon kind of suction cup sticks to the surface here. So one really quick setting that I want you to change is let's go ahead and delete this and start over. Make a relatively small polygon about this big. So from here, what I want you to do is scroll down over here, and this little offset amount, it might be set to 0. It's going to be pretty much whatever the default is. So this says constrain to background and then offset. We put in a default size sphere, so that sphere is roughly 1 meter in diameter. So the higher this offset is, the farther off the surface your low poly or topologized mesh that you're creating is going to be. So if I set it to something like 10 millimeters, hit space, you're going to see that it kind of pops off the surface. And again, if I go to the side, it's currently set to that 10 millimeters. Let's get it about right there. Again, it might be hard to see depending on the resolution, but if we pop this up to something like 30 millimeters and hit enter, you can see that it kind of screwed stuff up a little bit. So let's try that again. 30 millimeters, hit enter. And now when I go to the side again, it's based off of your camera angle, and I was at a weird camera angle. But now you can see it's sticking up farther from the surface. So in our case, we can keep it to something small like 5 or 10 millimeters. But just know that the distance your working mesh is away from your reference mesh is determined by this little offset amount right here. So we'll just set it and leave it to this little 10 millimeters right here. Go ahead and scroll back up on the tools. So let's go ahead and hit the space bar. So now at this point we have a polygon or topology pen tool has been dropped. We just effectively have one little polygon here that we can move around and do whatever we want with. But you'll notice when we use this tool, it actually kind of suction cup to the background element. So let's go ahead and turn that off. As soon as I hit this topology pen, pay attention to what's happening up here. Topology pen. So this guy right here, switch to background. That's our constraint. What is our mesh going to stick to? And snapping turned on as well. So what's happening is our new mesh is kind of suction cupping to the old mesh. So if I have this topology pen, what I can do is manipulate this one polygon in a number of ways. It's kind of contextual where my mouse is at for what element I select. So if I hover over a vertex, you see that it turns that cyan color. Hover over an edge, it highlights as well. Hover over a face, it highlights as well. So Topology Pen active, hover over a face, left click and drag, and you can see that this polygon will suction cup right to the background mesh. So I can grab the edge and do the same thing. I can pull this in really tight. I can pull it back really far. But the element that I'm selecting is suction cupping as best it can to the thing behind it. So when I select this edge, it's technically selecting this vertice and moving them at the same time. So when it's suction cupped all the way back here, you'll see that the polygon face is kind of cutting through the surface right here. There's no extra edge here to make it hold this shape. So what we can do is just move this so it's a little bit closer. Then I can grab an individual vertex and move this around. And you can see that it does that same suction cup maneuver where it stays that 10 millimeters we set off the surface. So if there's ever a point where the mesh is more curved than the polygon it's sitting on, you'll see that it kind of clips through. So ideally, if we were going to retopologize a sphere, we wouldn't want to do 4 big polygons and make a cube, because obviously that's not going to look like a sphere. Hit undo a couple times. You ideally need to add as much geometry or as many faces is required to recreate the shape that you want. So let's dive a little bit more into this Topology Pen Tool. Again, we've already determined that if you have the Topology Pen Tool active, you hold Control, left click and drag, you're going to draw out a new polygon, and then without any modifiers held, you just left click, you select an element, and then you can move it. Let's go ahead and delete that polygon, reactivate the Topology Pen. So now, if I want to kind of add topology to this, there's going to be a lot of modifier keys that do different things. Again, if I hover over this, this will give you kind of a rundown of, in a sense, everything that this tool can do. So let's kind of go over these. The first one that I want to cover is adding new geometry. So if I hold the Shift key, hover over an edge, and then left click and drag, what it's going to do is just bring out another edge. So hold Shift, left click, pull out an edge. Hold Shift, left click, and now when I start pulling out an edge, notice as this edge starts to get close to this other edge, at a certain point it's going to snap, and you're going to see this vertice, boom, snaps right to that vertice, because it thinks that this is what you want. If it's not what you want, you can always pull it down, but realistically it's intentional. It's trying to create geometry for you. So let's go ahead and pull this out. Snap, snap. You can see how this is a really quick way of pulling out polygons that really simply contour to the shape that you need. Really powerful. So now that we have some geometry, let's see what some of the other clicks do without modifiers. So the first thing we're going to do is hover over a vertex, middle mouse click, and start dragging. And it's very, very faint, but there's a really light pink line that you'll see. So if I drag this to another vertice, you'll see that it snaps and it effectively triangulates or cuts up that polygon. So again, I can do the same thing here. I can't snap it to an edge, it can only snap to another vertice. So here we have a triangle, so I can't really split this triangle up in any way, but I can go up here to the left and turn that quad into a tri. So let's go ahead and just hit the undo key to bring that back to its normal shape. So the next thing I want to go over is the right mouse button. So if I hover over an edge and I use a right mouse button, or right click, I can drag that entire edge loop wherever I want it to go. So compare that to the left mouse button. It's only going to grab the single edge loop that I have, or the edge that I have selected, while right mouse click grabs that entire edge loop. So now let's see how that right mouse button behaves when we use the Shift key. So hover over an edge, hold Shift and right mouse button, and it pulls out an entire loop. So you could see really quickly how you could start fleshing out a lot of geometry very, very quickly. And again, something like this, you might not be happy with the results of these edges. So I can either go in and delete these, switch back to my Topology tab, and fill these in how I want them to be filled in, or I can just left mouse click and kind of shift and organize these in a manner that I see fit. Again, ideally, if I was making a sphere, I wouldn't want to have a lot of these really long gaps. I would want to make sure that my polygons, just like in that lecture, are a little bit more uniform, a little bit more closer to square, and a little bit closer together. So the next thing we're going to experiment with would be holding the Shift key and left clicking and dragging on a vertice. So what this is going to do, hold Shift, left click, and drag, it is going to draw out another polygon, but it's going to be the two edges that are connected to that one vertice is where they're going to draw from. So in this case, let's go ahead and hit undo. I hold Shift, pull out a vertice. Let's just tweak that a little bit. Now I can move this around, and after a little bit of tweaking, you can see how I redirected this edge flow back into itself. So now, again, if I was to do two polygons and hit L for loop, what it's going to do is wrap back around into itself. So again, that sometimes is helpful, sometimes it's not. It just depends on what you're doing at the time. So we'll hit undo a few times and go back to normal. So really quickly, I'm just going to hover over an edge, right mouse click, and drag and pull out these vertices. So now I can kind of have a gap right here. So if I hover over an edge, hold shift and middle mouse click, what's going to happen is it's going to add a new edge loop. And then you'll see that it even sees the difference between these two, the distance here, and it'll go ahead and suction cup or snap those new vertices right to our surface as we would expect. So again, another really handy tool. And again, I can go ahead and put as many cuts in here as I want. We'll go ahead and hit undo. So again, Topology Pen, hold shift, middle mouse click, and it adds another loop. So another one that's sometimes handy, if you hover over an edge, hold Control, left click, and drag, what it's going to do is actually do an edge slide. So even if I move my mouse up or down, you'll see it won't go up or down like this. It will only slide back and forth on the edge. It's kind of constrained in a way. So again, sometimes useful, sometimes not. But again, a cool little trick. So the last one I'll go over will be the fall off. And to do that, what you want to do is hover your mouse away from a mesh, then right click and drag left and right. Your cursor is going to change from kind of an infinitely small sphere of influence to as great of a sphere of influence as you want. So when it's larger, and I hover over a vertice, let's say, and I left click and drag, this sphere size is going to be all what gets influenced. So left click and drag, now you can see everything in a soft way is getting moved across the surface. So sometimes this can be really beneficial. Sometimes it can kind of screw up what you're working on, because again, it's kind of working over here how I want it, but over here you can see that I'm getting a bit of a zigzag. So let's go ahead and hit undo. So again, usually I recommend having this small, if not all the way small, so drag it all the way to the left. Over here, fall off radius is at 0. Dragging it, you can see it increases over here. So I prefer that radius to be to 0, but if you like working with that radius, you can definitely use it. So again, that's kind of a lot of hotkeys, and a lot of these, there's not really ways to get to those sub-elements of this tool without using hotkeys. So if you hate hotkeys and can't remember them, just hover your mouse over this, and it'll go through every one of those. And there's one or two towards the bottom that I just kind of skipped. If you want to kind of look at those and experiment with them, you definitely can. So what I want you to do for practice is go ahead and just delete this little mass. I want you to go to the top. Again, we have this little guy pointing up, so we know it weighs the top. And I'm effectively just going to draw a ring of polygons around the top of this. So again, hold Control, left click and drag to get my first polygon. And then what I'm going to do is hold Shift, pull out another one, and then I need to start rotating these edges around. Hold Shift, pull out another one. Hold Shift, pull out another one. Let's actually make this symmetrical. Hold Shift, pull this one would be straight out, so this one kind of matches this one up here. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect, it's just kind of time on task messing with these tools so you get a little bit more comfortable with them. And now let's kind of do the mirrored operation over here. Pull this up. And have this one snap. So again, this one I can either pull it like this and then manually snap our last one right here and then adjust, or I can shift left click, and as soon as I get to that edge, move my cursor right over the edge, it'll realize what I want to do and it'll snap for me. So at this time, now I can go in and do a little bit more fine adjust, and you can make this as perfect or not as you want. It's just kind of getting in the habit of using that tool. And let's say I wanted to fill this in, I'd hold Shift, left click and drag, 1, 2, 3, and now I have the top cap of this filled in effectively. Again, it's not perfect by any means, but it's just getting used to those tools. So that being said, let's try something out real quick. what I'm going to do is go ahead and I have the topology pen turned on. Let's turn on symmetry in the X. And I know that this is kind of the front of the sphere. So hold Control, left click and drag, and you'll see that two different polygons draw out. So now if I was to move this one up here, they're going to move together, snap, snap. Can move these up. Now what I can do is, again, if I was to click on this one, what it's going to do is it's actually going to allow me to break symmetry. So at this point, at least, I want to stay away from this center line. But what I can do is just know that a lot of Modo's other tools will still work when this topology pen is active. So another thing, speaking of other tools, technically I can use my other modeling tools on this geometry. So if I go to my modeling tab over here, go to edit, let's say, and let's actually, instead of that, let's do polygon. We'll select these two polygons here, right click bevel, hover over the 3D viewport. Then what I'm going to do, is click and drag. And what's happening here is it actually extruded these faces out. So I have kind of extra faces there. Let's go ahead and go to this edge, go to edge over here, do edge extend, so left click, right click, and pull this out. Have snapping turned off. Pull this out. And just know that I can use my normal modeling tools in tandem, jump back over here, with the topology pen. So just know that these kind of work hand in hand with each other. Let's go ahead and double click and delete this piece out. There we go, and we'll just leave this little hat on for now. So this next tool doesn't really have a lot to go with it, but what you can do with this is if I just do one click, it's going to put down one vertice. Click again, it'll put down another vertice. Third time, at that point it has enough to make a triangle, and then a fourth time I'd make a quad. If I click a fifth time, with the default settings, it's going to make an n-gon. And another thing to notice, let's hit pen. By default, this guy right here is probably set to 0, so if I draw a new polygon on here, you won't really see it because it's kind of underneath the surface at that point, because this polygon, or this vertex, this one, and this one, all four of these are perfectly snapped to the surface, so it's kind of underneath this. Let's go ahead and just delete that out. So again, to see what you're working with, it might be worth it to go ahead and set the offset amount to something like 5 millimeters, 10 millimeters, something like that, just so you can see what you're working with. So setting this to 10 millimeters, I'm going to go ahead and turn on this little checkbox right here called Make Quads. So now I'm going to go ahead, and when I put my third point, it puts down a quad. It didn't put a triangle right here. It just automatically guessed where I would want the other vertice and put one down. So now again, I haven't canceled the tool. I have this edge selected, so if I click again, what's going to happen is it's going to make another quad, and depending on my camera angle, you're going to see at some point it's going to start to skew a little bit, but this is a really quick way to go ahead and make a different series of quads. The other thing I can do is select an individual vertice and move it and manipulate it. And then when I move a vertice and manipulate it, you'll notice that the last selected one stays yellow. So if I was to click off the surface of this, what it's going to do is it's going to put out another vertice. Let's click again. It actually kind of inverted it the way I didn't want it to do it. There we go. We'll just click and drag it over here. So in that capacity, you can see how it kind of draws out another quad. Oh, and it's a little bit unpredictable. There we go. But you can have it draw out quads as you see fit. Oops, hit the F1 key. So let's go ahead and delete this, and delete this guy as well. Okay, this next tool is a little bit circumstantial. You might find a use for it, but Topology Sketch, let's just go ahead and preemptively set that offset amount to 10 millimeters. Now I can just click and drag on the surface, and you can see it's going to kind of draw out a series of, or a strip of polygons. Again, sometimes it's useful, it really depends on what you're doing, but all of those are going to stick to the surface. So next up, the bridge tool. This is just the same bridge tool that is over here under edge or polygon bridge, either or. It's kind of the same tool. So over here, the topology tweak, this is the same thing as when you have the topology pen active. So this is just the left click versions of your topology pen. I can move a polygon face around, go to the topology tweak. It'll do the same thing where I can move, scale, rotate, or I'm sorry, move an edge, a vertice, or a polygon face. So this next one is actually kind of cool. These ones are just kind of the default modeling tools, but the last one I wanted to go over is a smooth right here. So let's go ahead and do a setup for this. What I'm going to do is under create, I'm going to hit sphere. Let's do a default globe sphere, hit right click, and that should be the default globe size. And I'm going to double click on this, kind of pull it down. And now what I want to do is I only want the bottom chunk of this for this example. So let's select two polygons, L for loop, delete those. Let's go ahead and rotate this and scale it in some seemingly weird way. So again, it's going to be scaled up a little bit. Let's turn snap off because that's making things behave a little bit weird. So now let's try to nest this, eyeball it as good as we can into the surface, somewhere around right here. So again, let's have that. Okay, that's penetrating in a little bit. This one's sticking out a little bit. We have all these polygons selected. We're going to go back to our topology pen, or our topology tools, and then we're going to left click on the smooth button. So over here, there's a bunch of defaults. We're going to leave those to default for right now. Right click over here, and you'll see all of our vertices suction cupped to the surface. So it wouldn't matter if, let's go ahead and use the move brush, these were a little bit in, a little bit out, just kind of wonky all over the place. I select those. Smooth, I could do that offset amount that we've been doing of 10 millimeters. If I want it to be able to see everything perfectly, I can either hit apply or again right click, and you can see that that just suction cups everything to the surface. So it's kind of handy in a handful of different ways. If you were doing retopologizing a character's arm, for example, you could just drop in a default cylinder. The character's arm is like this. You throw down a larger cylinder on top of it, evenly space your polygons, and then you hit that smooth button and your kind of perfectly made cylinder will suction cup to the arm. Again, a couple edge cases where that's usable, but realistically you'll probably get a lot of use out of this smooth tool right here. So there's a lot of tools in the retopology section, and again, your topology tab kind of changes some things around visually to where you can kind of work on your retopo mesh and have your other mesh kind of visible. We went over some different settings of that in the beginning, but overall the tool you're going to use the most is going to be this Topology Pen Tool. Some of these other ones, it's good to have access to them, but just know that you can always jump over to the modeling tab and access any of the modeling tools at any time. For the tools we did go over though, just know that there are a lot of settings in here and little subsections of settings. So a lot of powerful and different things you can do. We just kind of scratch the surface with what everything does. So one more thing that I want to mention was I had you guys switch this to default, and it should by default be on advanced. So let's just compare that really quickly. And again, this is something that if you have a faster computer, you can use this, but you don't necessarily have to. If you're finding slowdown or if you're finding crashes, I would just switch to this default. But realistically, I've been giving you guys that, having you do this offset amount down here so you don't have kind of invisible, in a sense, polygons that are hiding under the surface. Let's set that to 10 millimeters. And even at that point, that one's not really sticking out all that well. There we go. So again, 10 millimeters, this is sticking up. If I move this closer, the polygon becomes more visible. So let's comparatively just make let's actually make one that's the same size, but at 0 millimeters, and just put it right here. So again, this one 10 millimeters out, we can see it. This one's suction cupped to the surface without that offset, and we really can't see it. But let's go into default and switch this to advanced real quick. So as soon as we do this, you'll see that the sphere gets a little bit more shiny, But now we can see all of our polygons perfectly, even with the offset amount. Even if this was kind of hidden underneath the surface just a little bit, it's still going to be visible. So realistically, if you're doing work professionally, you don't want to have a very large offset if you're doing something advanced like baking normal maps, for example. You want to have your mesh as the vertices of your mesh as close to the surface as possible, kind of like this guy. The only reason we do that offset, that's just to kind of help you guys out if you have a slower computer and you really can't see your polygons like this. So just know that that's a thing. If you can work on advanced, definitely do so, but we have that workaround to help you out. So what I'm going to do is just stay in the advanced mode, delete those two spheres out, or those two polygon faces out. What I want you to do to kind of finish this off is I want you to do two different retopology techniques for this, and I'll kind of just go through both of them just in case you're uncomfortable. So the first one, I'm just going to kind of use my existing topology pen or modeling tools to finish this out. So what I can do, have the topology pen selected, is I can kind of hold shift and bring down these edges almost one at a time. Something like this. You can see how this way is going to start to be a little bit tedious, because again, you're kind of doing work that in a sense has already been done. So retopology can either be a little bit soothing or a little bit tedious and terrible. It just depends on kind of your attitude and your kind of personal preference of things you like. So I could do something like this, and realistically I'd want to keep these edges a little bit more evenly spaced all the way down. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and I really don't expect you guys to either. It's just getting used to these tools and seeing how they feel. So from here, instead of bringing these down one at a time, I might be able to hold shift, right click, and pull down multiple edges. So you can see that that's going to be based off of our camera angle. So again, some things like this, it just depends on where my camera was at. I might need to come in and adjust these slightly to make sure things are evenly spaced. So something like this. So from here, if I look at the top, you can see where this is really starting to fall apart. So just spending a little bit extra time to kind of doctor this up. So now what I'm going to do is let's just kind of switch and rely on our modeling tool. So let's copy paste, switch to rotate. I'm going to rotate this upside down, switch to a side view, and let's just move this down, something like this. Look at this from a few different angles. And now let's double click this edge, use our bridge tool, right click, and you can see, again, this is a little bit wobbly. We don't have evenly spaced polygons. As far as a sphere goes, you could probably just consider this bad topology, but we effectively used our topology tools to recreate the model. We remodeled something that we already had. Again, it's not mathematically perfect by any means, but this kind of works. So now let's go ahead and select this. Let's actually call this Retopo1, hit enter, N for new mesh, and we'll call this Retopo2. So this way is just potentially going to be a little bit quicker way or a different way of doing it, and this is just to get your guys kind of gears turning mentally to think about things in different ways. So we have this way of doing it. The thing that I would ideally like you to avoid is, let's turn on the topology pen. What I don't want you to do is make a tiny little square and then zoom in and make another one and make another one and make another one, and you can kind of see where this is going, because something like this, you're going to be sitting here all day, and then as soon as you eventually get around to the other side, you're going to realize that stuff's a little bit tilted, so you need to come in and adjust every one of these verts kind of one at a time, and it just becomes really, really tedious. Then you need to worry about the top kind of adding to the bottom. It just kind of snowballs. So let's get rid of that. So let's do kind of the opposite of that. So instead of working really, really little and doing a lot of pieces, let's do fewer large pieces, and then we can cut those up. So again, this is the front of our mesh. Let's hold the control key, click and drag out. And just, I guess so you know, I can click and drag and move this over to this, and now it's going to snap to this separate mesh. Doesn't really matter as long as there's a mesh there for it to snap to. But regardless, I have this polygon. Let's hold shift, click, and drag out this one, put this one about right here. And now what we're doing is probably, initially it's a weird way to say I'm going to make a sphere, is we're making a cube. So I have side 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's just bridge these two together, right click. Now to make the top one, I can just double click this, P for polygon, double click the bottom, P for polygon. Now I have a cube very crudely sitting, and all of these vertices are snapped to the edges of our sphere. Now what I'm going to do is, again, this is a simple sphere in a sense, but it's in cube form. But I have clean geometry. So if I hold Shift, hover over the edge, middle mouse click, what's going to happen is I'm going to get a little bit of a loop that goes around here, and you can see it tried to make it round down here, just tried to stick to the surface. So let's go to this side, hold Shift, middle mouse click. Okay, that didn't work very good, but we have the topology that we can kind of move in place. You can probably see where this is going. Now I'm going to go ahead and do one around the equator in a sense, and then move these all into place. So make sure we're just moving the vertices. So again, this is kind of a different way of doing it. We're kind of realizing that our clean loops will lead to more clean loops. We just have to kind of doctor them in place, because again, all of the snapping or the sticking that's happening is based off of our camera angle. So if I do snapping like this right here, these verts that I can see on my screen turn out fairly well, but as soon as I go to the vert like this one was at a glancing angle of the screen, they don't turn out all that well. So what I want to do is I want to just go to a top view, make sure this is centered. Let's just try to line up kind of this face that consists of the top. Line this up a little bit better. Let's go to the bottom and do the same thing. And again, technically I could use like the scale tool and whatnot to make sure that these are all perfectly lined up. But again, we're just eyeballing this for the kind of process of using these tools for the first time. Go to the back view, and again, Control Spacebar is bringing up this. I hover over the view I want, let go, and then it goes to that desired view. So left view real quick. Oops, I was on the right view, so now we'll do a left view. So something like that. So you can see this is already starting to look a little bit better. Again, it's still a little bit rough. Ideally, if you're going to make a sphere, you just use the sphere tool and it'll mathematically be perfect. So let's add one more round of hold Shift, hover over the edge, middle mouse click, middle mouse click. And let's just make sure that these are lined up. So again, oops, this is just time on task of the more you use the tool, the more you're going to get comfortable with the tool. So let's add two more in here. Try to keep our edges as straight as possible. Again, this like zigzagging here, it's what you kind of want to avoid. You want to keep things a little bit more straight. Same thing here, a little bit of zigzagging. You can kind of average these out. Let's go ahead and add a loop here and a loop here, and that should be good enough for our geometry. Now we just need to kind of massage these into place. And again, this isn't making a portfolio piece. This is just familiarizing yourself with the tools, getting comfortable with the tools. Kind of the same thing when you first started with 3D. You just throw something in the scene and you just kind of orbit, rotate around the object just so you can get used to the navigation controls. It's kind of a very similar thing here. So again, I don't want you guys to spend a lot of time on this and worry about making it absolutely perfect. Something realistically like this is probably going to be fine. So once you get something like this. We'll call this good. What I want you to do is just, I mean, you can save out the 3D file and upload that if you want to. Let's go ahead and turn off the cone, turn off the reference sphere, but just have your Retoposphere 1, slide that over to the left, hold Shift, click Retoposphere 2, or even just jump into the Model tab and just have both of these active, and just really quickly make a screenshot. Oops. Make a screenshot of this guy and turn that in. That's going to kind of be proof enough that you kind of went through the motions and you kind of were introduced to these retopology tools. Next week we'll go ahead and make something that's actually of substance now that we kind of know how the tools work. We'll do something that actually has topology. It's going to be a little bit more challenging, but knowing these foundational tools is going to help us out quite a bit for the next video.